All right, 206. This video is about filters and equalization, and it's obviously about using EQ as a plugin in Logic. And I'm going to briefly explain a couple of different types of filters, and then also talk about using EQ in Logic, and especially how to use the plugin specifically. So, filters and equalization. Filters and equalization allow for the enhancement, the added dB, or removal, minus dB, of specific frequencies in the frequency spectrum. In Logic Pro, this is largely done in the channel EQ pictured below. So this is the channel EQ. It's a plugin that we use all the time. And it's basically, it's an excellent EQ, a visual EQ that shows me the frequencies of the sounds that are coming out in addition to what I'm cutting or enhancing. So you can see this image shows this little line here, this little jagged line. That is actually showing me the frequencies that are being performed at the moment. So I can get a visualization of where the frequencies live and then change them by adding or subtracting sound from those frequencies, okay? And a very important concept here is the idea of the cutoff frequency, okay? And the cutoff frequency is the frequency where the filter begins to filter the sound. So this is obviously a number in hertz, and it can change. Obviously, I can adjust it at any time or even automate it so it changes dynamically inside a song or in a piece. But the cutoff frequency is the most important feature in a filter, okay? Now, there are three main types of filters other than just our general EQ. The first one is called a high pass filter. And a high pass filter often has the acronym HPF, obviously to stand for high pass filter. And this filter filters out low frequencies while allowing high frequencies to pass, okay? And you can see down here in Logic, I have actually turned on what's called the high pass filter by actually clicking on this little button right here, which I'll show you in Logic in a minute. And then you can see I've pulled this over, and my frequency band here, the cutoff frequency for my high pass filter is 215 hertz. And then this is the 24 dB octave here is showing me how intense the cutoff is. Is it a slope, really intense slope, or is it pretty dramatic or like instantly cutting off? But that's what these numbers down here mean, okay? But again, you can see what's happening is a high pass filter cuts out the low end, right? And this is probably the most common type of filter there is for audio production, because we're constantly trying to attenuate. It's a word we use all the time. Attenuate meaning to remove too much low end frequencies, because they really tend to muddle up your mixes and turn things into mud, okay? The next one is called the low pass filter, the LPF. And a low pass filter filters out high frequencies while allowing low frequencies to pass, okay? And you can see in Logic here, I'm using the low pass filter, and at the 2000 mark roughly, in fact, if we look here, it's 1960, I am starting my cut of the high frequencies of this sound. And by 5000, they're pretty much gone completely, okay? So this is a low pass filter, and it's another one that we see a fair amount if we're trying to remove the frequencies in the upper registers of a sound, okay? The last one is called a band pass filter. And a band pass filter, which has the acronym BPF, which you often will see. So the acronyms are important because you'll see them all the time in filters. You'll see BPF instead of band pass filter written out. Is a filter that allows a specific band of frequencies to pass, like between 400 and 600, for example, okay? So there are two parameters here that really matter. Before I say that, down here you can see that this band pass filter is allowing a frequency band between 200 and 2000 K roughly to play, right? Not 2000 K, that's what, 200,000 K? 2K. So between 200 and 2K, these are the frequencies that are being filtered or allowed through the band pass filter, okay? So the two important factors here are the center frequency, and that's the frequency at the center of the filter. And then the second one is called the bandwidth, and that's the width of the filter. So you could do something, for instance, where you say, my bandpass filter has a center frequency of 200, and then the width is 100, okay? So in that case, if you think about it, if the center is 200, then and the width is 100, then the frequencies I'm hearing are 150 to 250, right? Because the center of 100 is 50, so there's 50 on the left side of the center, and there's 50 on the right side, so that's 150 to 250. And that's generally how bandpass filters are measured or used, okay? We're adjusting the band frequency width and the center frequency. So anyway, so these are the most common types of frequency or filters. So let's talk about using these in Logic. Before that, actually, we're just going to talk about using EQ at all. So if I go up here to Alchemy, I have Alchemy installed. So one thing to remember is that, remember, EQ is the salt of your sounds, right? It's used to enhance the sound. So it's most common that the first thing you do with any sound is EQ it, okay? Because I want to first get the sound sounding good or filtered, and then I pass it to things like delays and reverbs and other effects, okay? So there are two ways of adding an EQ. Either I can double click in this window right here that says EQ, or I can go down here to where it says audio effects and actually choose EQ. So if I go down here, you can see channel strip is right here, channel EQ is right here, but that's because I've already chosen it. So it automatically goes into this recent category. If you don't see it there, you have to go down to the EQ slip here and then choose channel EQ and then stereo, okay? And again, it will open the EQ, right? And there it is. So if it's not there, or sorry, the other possibility is this. I can just click in here. So if I click in this EQ window, it automatically adds channel EQ right into the top, and you go from there. Just so you know, if I have a bunch of other effects first, so imagine I have an auto filter, and then I have a fat FX with a PH, and I have a bit crusher, okay? If I add the EQ, it's going to put the EQ at the bottom, right? So you can see the EQ has been put down here at the bottom. I want it up top. So the easiest way to put it up top is actually just, I can drag and rearrange these. Now, annoyingly, I really wish it would just move them down, but it doesn't. What it does is it swaps those two. So if you wanted to keep the ordering, you'd have to go through and fix all of these. But you can see I can just reorder these by grabbing them and dragging them around, and it will reorder your effects, okay? And I'll talk about this later, but this is called an effects chain, and it really matters because effects chains are processed top to bottom. So first EQ, then auto filter, then fat FX, then bit crusher, and it can affect the sound, the ordering that you have these effects posted in here, okay? So I now have a channel EQ in here, and I can close out all this other stuff. In fact, I don't need any of these things. Let me just get rid of them because I don't want the auto filter. I don't want these fat FX. I just want to have this big fat synthesizer that I brought in from the Alchemy. All right, it sounds like this. So you can see this has a nice thick bandwidth. I can see lots of frequencies from 80 up to around 3,000 hertz, right? So the way the filter works, first of all, if I want a high or a low pass filter, I have to turn on these buttons here. So this is the low pass, okay? And then you can see now I have a node down here for the lowest button here, the red one, okay? And I can drag this over here. I can even do stuff like this where I'm actually accentuating the cutoff area. I can also change the hertz by going down here and dragging this left and right while holding down, okay? So, and you can see too, the slope here is adjusted here with this 8 to 12 to 6. So the intensity of my cutoff is determined by this middle number, all right? And then the last number down here is called the Q. And the Q determines the peak of my slope. So let me go out here to another frequency. So as you can see, there are all these other bands, and I can actually remove them or add them if I want by clicking on them. And say I want to enhance 1,000 hertz. I can just lift this up, okay? Now, you can see what down here, what I'm doing is at 1,000 hertz, I'm lifting this by 6 decibels, all right? So watch what the Q does though, because it really explains to you what it does. It narrows or widens that peak, right? And it's called the Q. And it either accentuates, I can have a nice round accentuation of 1,000 hertz, or I can have a very narrow, a specific, like 1,000 hertz specifically emphasized, okay? And listen to the difference here. If I really crank the dB, it's too narrow right now to hear. But if I widen it a little bit, you can hear that frequency. Let me go down. We should hear this move. So if I narrow this again, let me try and narrow it again. Doing, right? In fact, one of the coolest effects to do in your tracks is to automate this number here. And we're going to talk about automation next week, but how I can map this to move in real time during my song or my piece so that the track and this patch moves and automates and morphs and changes in real time. It's really awesome and very powerful as a tool. Anyway, so a couple things to remember about EQ. I'm not going to get too deep in this because I covered it in class, and I'm going to cover it again on Friday for you guys that have missed it. EQ is something that you have to be careful with because remember, you're boosting signal frequencies. So if I do something crazy like this, and I'm boosting all of this stuff, you kind of wonder what's the point if you're boosting everything. And remember, you're boosting, for instance, here, I'm boosting the signal by 14 decibels, sorry, right? So 14 decibels at 4,000 hertz, or here, might be very loud. Or what it can do is cause my track to clip here. Now, it may not, but I have to be careful because I am boosting the frequency. So in general, EQ is a more subtle effect, okay? And I get into, in class, I talked about specific uses of it. But one thing I really recommend is, again, we go to the user defaults and we go down and we look at these different settings, right? So here, if you wanted to do a guitar, for instance, acoustic guitar, right? You can see that there's a subtle low cut filter, and then there's an accentuation here at 2,660 hertz, all right? And also in the higher end. So, and if I keep going, you'll see most of these are fairly subtle adjustments. They're not massive, like I always say, these are rolling hills. They're not big mountains, okay? So just be careful with your EQ and how much you go nuts with it. I often see students trying to get things louder. And so I see EQs like this, and I'm like, why aren't you just turning the volume up? What's the point of that EQ, right? Just turn up the volume. Or often the problem is that volume needs to be turned down elsewhere. But anyways, you get the basic idea. So just be careful with your EQ, and your assignment is to use EQ. And again, I expect to see this in some of your tracks, okay? Now be aware, for one thing, the last thing I'm going to talk about here, and then I'll be done, is that when you choose a preset, sometimes it automatically gets an EQ, all right? So let me try something. Studio horns, 7-piece section, Sugar Hill, sure, okay? When I load this, my preset has an EQ in it, all right? So I know that this adds an EQ, but I would like you to try experimenting with some EQ, add some EQ of your own to one of your audio tracks or something. So even though this EQ is added already, you know, it'd be nice to see some of your own EQ in something, right? So, you know, this is some fake horn thing. In the synthesizers, you're less likely to see an EQ. Is that true? Or yeah. So here there's no EQ. Sometimes the EQ is actually also available inside the synthesizer. There's often an EQ. There's a second EQ or filtering that we can do. That's a really cool synth. Sorry, I got a little out of control here. Okay. So anyways, that is EQ. And please, you know, do your daily 10 for tonight that I'm going to be posting. This covers this video. So I will talk